G'day gymnastics skill seekers, welcome back to another training vlog. It's currently week 2 of my new phase, and that's the new phase for the new year. And today I'm going to talk about day number 4. Now last week I shared day number 1 of my training, and I would have liked to have shared day number 2, but my tripod for my camera broke and it made it quite difficult to film the exercises on days 2 and 3. So luckily I've got a new tripod. Look at that bad boy. And it delivered in time for me to be able to film the videos on day 4. So that's why I'm making day 4 now. I'm also traveling right now and spending time with family. So we're currently in an Airbnb at a place called Sceale Bay, which is on the Eyre Peninsula of South Australia. The beach is just over the road, which is epic. And it's one of a few places where you can drive your 4-wheel drive on the beach. And the beaches are massive, so it's easy to find a peaceful spot away from the crowds. It's also good for fishing, diving, surfing, and just chilling out really, so enjoying our time here. Luckily, the Airbnb has a nice place for me to hang my rings, so I can still do my rings training. There's also a nice deck out the back, so a nice flat surface for handstands and plenty of space for me to do my flexibility stuff. So day 4 is all about flexibility. It just gives me a chance to focus on my biggest gymnastic weakness, which is flexibility. So it's a combination of all of my goals that I'm working on. So it's helping me work towards my Pike goals, my Pancake goals, my gymnastics bridge goals, and my front splits goals. So the session starts with a little bit of hip capsule work. So I'm working on a pigeon stretch, pretty much the same as last phase, but now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to add in some rotations and forward folds. So as I lean forward, I'm twisting the opposite shoulder towards the front knee and spending a little bit of time or pausing at the bottom of each rep and then coming back and out. So I'm doing about 8 reps going up and down, and then on the final rep, I just hang out in that bottom position. Now, as I do this, I'm trying to feel that I'm stretching out the glute of that front hip. So that rotation is internally rotating the back leg, the hip of the back leg, and also pushing that shoulder across so that I create length across the posterior chain and start to feel the stretch in that hip. So improving hip external rotation is what's happening in the pigeon stretch. I'm supersetting that with a side-lying hip internal rotation exercise. So when we set up for this, we need to make sure the knee is level with the hips, and we also want to make sure the knee has a 90 degrees of flexion. A lot of clients that I give this exercise to get a little bit sloppy here and don't elevate the knee enough, so don't flex the hip and bring the knee up, and also don't bend that knee to 90 degrees. So it's like really focusing on getting that right, because it's the best angle to sort of target the hip internal rotators. We also want to make sure that the hip isn't hiking. So I'm placing my hand on the upper hip bone, and as I start to do the hip internal rotation, I don't want to feel that hip moving up. I want to keep that hip pretty stationary so that I'm really starting to isolate the hip internal rotation and not to use the hip hiking to generate false hip internal rotation. At the top of the range, I'm just actively fighting to try and find more hip internal rotation. So I feel the muscles deep inside the hip working and contracting here, and I'm just trying to increase that range of motion there and help to get more mobility in through the hip with that. So they're my first 2 exercises, the pigeon stretch and the hip internal rotation. I'm doing 3 rounds of both of those. From there, I'm going to move into my Pike mobility. So we're starting with a seated Pike single leg lift, and we're using the band for a little bit of assistance, but also for feedback. So when I set up for this, I just do a little bit of a forward fold stretch to help lengthen the posterior chain before I try to strengthen the anterior chain. So by stretching out those hamstrings, it's going to allow me to get a better leg lift in the repetitions here. So the band goes around my back and it goes on the top of the hip. So this allows me to get feedback that I'm not tilting the hip backwards. I want to make sure I'm keeping a slight anterior pelvic tilt here as I perform the leg lifts. What I also like about the hip is the band pulls the femur into the back of the socket of the hip, okay? Which allows us to get better activation of the hip flexors as we perform that leg lift. So I'm lifting as high as I can, and then I try to focus on contracting the hip flexors and lifting even more. So I'm really squeezing there. And the sensation that I get, or the feeling that I get, is closing the angle between the belly and the thigh. So can I feel the thigh touching my belly, and how high up can I take that thigh on my belly to get that strong core compression here? I need a bigger belly because then it'll be easier, but this is where I'm at right now. And this is probably the highest I've done leg lifts, but obviously the band is assisting this as well. So we're just trying to build core compression strength, increase the strength of those hip flexors, which will help pull us deeper into the pike stretch. I'm supersetting that with a head to toe. And I'm really focusing on how I set up for this exercise. So it's a little bit different to how I've done it in the past. I'm thinking about the single leg good morning and really pushing the hips back, and again, closing the angle between my torso and the thigh. How much of my belly can I get to touch the thigh? How far down can I come in that sort of single leg good morning? Once I've done that, then I'm going to start to lean forward and take the ankle into more dorsiflexion. I'm going to grip the big toe with my index finger and then start my head to toe pulses. The first few reps, I've got the thumb up, and then as I sink into the stretch a little bit more, I'm starting to bend the thumb and touch the knuckle and just work on that range. As I do the pulsing repetitions, I'm trying to think about doing them slowly and doing them as a result of contracting the hip flexor and pulling myself deeper into the head to toe. I'm also trying to think about lengthening the spine, so being long, not flexing the spine as much, but trying to actually lift the chest a little bit and increase the length of the spine. For me, I still feel this pretty much in the calves. The hamstrings are stretching, and I get a little sensation there, but for me, the tightness really is still in my calves. So hopefully, sticking with this over time, I'll get more length in the calves and start to get a little bit lower. So yeah, the goal in this phase is definitely to improve that head to toe, get closer to head to toe, and then start working from there. Hopefully I can start to use the fist on the toe and then start to go down finger by finger by finger until I get obviously head to toe. So we're using a targeted sort of system here. I have to touch my head to the target, and this allows me to keep every repetition the same, but it also allows me to measure depth and therefore measure progress over the phases. So it's good to have a target to aim for. So yeah, I'm supersetting the seated pike single leg lifts and the head to toe. It's 3 rounds of both of those. Then I'm going to move into straddle leg lifts. So it's a lot of core compression work in this one. So now I'm sitting down in the straddle position. And again, I'm starting out by just doing a little bit of stretching to try to lengthen the posterior chain before I contract or strengthen the anterior chain here. This allows me to get a little bit of the outer hamstring. I feel the stretch in the outer hamstring, which is definitely the tightest part of my hamstring. So we're talking bicep femoris, which is handy because that's what I've got to stretch. And then I'm obviously doing the leg lifts here. Same principle as the seated pike lifts. The band is assisting, pulling the femur into the back of the hip capsule, and also allowing me to lift the leg a little bit higher thanks to the assistance. Again, trying to feel how the thigh is touching the belly, and can I close that angle? More of the thigh touching the belly, trying to actively push into the floor. So I'm not letting the torso back. The band is giving me feedback around the hips, and I'm really trying to focus on core compression. The height of the leg lift isn't the focus here, okay? A lot of people try to lift the leg higher, lean back, oh look, I've got more height in the leg lift. That's not the focus of the exercise. The focus of the exercise is to close the angle between the torso and the leg. So if you lean the torso back, you're actually opening that angle and you're making the exercise less effective. So don't worry about the leg lift height, focus more on closing that angle if you're doing, pike leg lifts or straddle leg lifts. Okay, I'm supersetting that with a seated pancake stretch. In the past phases, I've been using a weight on my back with this exercise. So the weight is sort of pushing me into the pancake, but I don't have a weight with me because we're traveling on the road at the moment. So I'm using a band to assist me and pull me deeper into that pancake. I quite like this exercise. It feels a little bit different from the weighted one on the back, and it allows you just sort of work your way in to the pancake. So rocking side to side, ankle plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, digging the heels in, trying to contract the hip flexors, pull myself deeper. This week didn't feel as low as my sets and reps last week for some reason, but I do think this exercise is going to help me progress over the weeks ahead. So I really feel this in sort of the high hamstring gluteal fold. So right up under my butt is where I'm feeling this stretch right now. And it's definitely an area that I need to lengthen a little bit more. Again, I feel that I'm sitting over the hip bones and I'm starting to get more anterior pelvic tilt in that seated straddle forward fold. So they're supersetted, the single leg straddle leg lifts and the seated pancake stretch with the band there. From here, I'm moving into sort of front splits and gymnastics bridge work. So we're using the long lunge hold here for the front split stretch. So I was using assisted glute lifts in the last phase. This one takes out the assistance and we're trying to go deep in this long lunge. We're keeping the front knee bent right now, and it's okay for the toes of the front foot to lift off the floor and just sinking deep down into that deep hip flexor stretch. Trying to keep the hip square, so rear hip is internally rotated here. And then obviously pulling the front knee or abducting the front hip a little bit, so pulling that knee out to the side so it allows the hips to sink deeper. I really like this stretch. It's challenging because of the balance, so I find in the later sets it's a little bit harder. Maybe I'm sinking deeper, the new range is harder to balance in, maybe the muscles are fatiguing, but yeah, as I go on, I think the balance becomes more challenging, but I obviously start to get deeper in this stretch as well. I'm curious to see how the progress will go over the weeks, over the 6 weeks with this stretch. So I'll compare that. I'll look at the week 1 video, which is this video, in comparison with week 6 when I get to that. I'm supersetting that with the gymnastics bridge push-ups. So I did this in the last phase, but the focus has slightly changed here. So in the last phase, I was working on maintaining sort of a higher elevation and straightening the legs to get a good stretch. But in this phase, I'm going to start to lower that elevation. I'm not too fussed about straightening the legs, but I'm more looking at, okay, how can I open the shoulders more? And can I actively contract the muscles of the back to pull me into a greater arch? And if that's the case, over the next few weeks, I'm really going to try to sink into this a lot more and get better thoracic extension. So it's repetitions of the gymnastics bridge push up and then like a 20-second isometric hold at the end there. As the sets go on, I feel this gets better. So I'm stretching out those muscles and sinking deeper, feeling it more in sort of pecs, a little bit in the shoulders, and obviously feeling the back muscles actively contracting to try and deepen that arch that I've got with this exercise. So that's my Sunday session. I did that on a Sunday. It's all about flexibility. It's roughly a 60-minute session. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the progress here. Gymnastics bridge has just been brought back into the program, so I expect to see that to progress quite quickly because it's sort of the first phase that we're using here. Front splits has just been brought into the program, so again, I expect that to progress quickly because it generally at the start you sort of see this big lot of progress and then it'll sort of slow down as we start to reach the end ranges and have to really focus on sinking deeper. The head to toe I've been working on for a few months, so the progress here could be a little bit slower. The progress is slowing down, but we're still making progress with this. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes as well. So they're the main things that I'm looking at in this phase and trying to figure out, okay, is what we're working on really making a difference here? But yeah, step by step, I think it will. I really enjoy the Sunday session. It's just a chance for me to get out after the weekend's over, sort of late on a Sunday afternoon, and just go through this mobility stuff. It's none of it's too stressful. It's just quite relaxing really, and afterwards I feel like I've had a good session. I know I'm doing something that's positive for my gymnastic strength goals, and I'm definitely making progress, so it's a fun session. Anyway, if you've got any questions about my training at all, about my flexibility, about your flexibility, about what you're working on, then please feel free to leave a comment below and I will get back to you. In the meantime, good luck with your training and I'll speak to you soon.